want to thank you all for being patient with an old faculty member who has aspirations that today I would like to show you how the diffusion of a particular foodway has connections to attributes of leadership, but also do this in a whimsical way because I'm the only thing between you and your luncheon. So, how is leadership like baklava? Well, let's see a definition of baklava. Historically, it's been a dessert. It's made of paper-thin layers of pastry. We now call it phyllo. Chopped nuts and layers of honey. Well, there's another definition to it, but first you ought to see the product. Now this happens to be American-style baklava. American-style baklava? Well, there are many, many styles of baklava. And it all goes back to leadership, not just in the kitchen, but leadership in how the diffusion took place going back a long, long, long time ago. So let's have another definition of baklava. This is the more well-known one about how as a sweet dessert, butter drenched. And the phyllo, so thin you can almost see through it. Spices, chopped nuts, honey lemon. This is good for colds. That's what I keep telling the doctors. And it's just wonderful. So let's do a little historical geography. Here we are in the Mediterranean lands. But I'm going to tell you about how we're going to create the baklava lands. So let's move on. Mesopotamian Egypt in ancient times. Some students are sure I was there in the 8th century before Common Era, but if we move forward, I'll tell you a little bit about the Assyrians. 8th century before Common Era. That's even older than I am. And so what they did was they had this very simple mixture. Very, very simple. It was chopped nuts, honey, dough. It's very old and a concoction that remains viable today. So what does this tell us? Well, the next thing to think about is good leadership and solid leadership takes time to produce and remain viable into the present. So now, are you ready for this next slide? Oh, this is so exciting for me because you're going to be introduced to my idea of the baklava lands. The baklava lands. Now this is the time after Alexander the Great. And we're talking about the 3rd century to 4th century BC. And Alexander the Great, well, let's move on. The Greeks took the Assyrian delicacy, they modified it, and they switched it. Thin, like this thin, very, very thin. And they would have multiple layers of the chopped nuts, the honey, the phyllo. Well, this dessert was so good that the Persians modified it. Then if we go into the high Middle Ages, and I'd like you to emphasize, oh my gracious, it's moved. Well, that can happen sometimes, but you know, if you go a little bit to the left of where that circle is, hot diggity, that's where Armenia is. And the Armenians had the cinnamon, the cloves. Then the Arabs take it over. And now at the time of the conquest of the Byzantine Empire, they put in cardamom. They put in rose water. And what does this tell us? Well, I borrowed this from that great source for all students and staff, faculty, Wikipedia. Leadership depends on blending traditions. Now, I'm just so glad about you're the first group to see a map that is being used for the Ottoman lands of the Baklava. And so what did the Ottomans do? We're talking after 1453. They begin to modify it. The spices. This becomes something that the Sultan and other members of the imperial court, very important delicacy. The types of fillings, not just certain nuts, but pistachio nuts. And they diffuse it because as they go conquering through Eastern Europe, they go in to places that now, Bulgaria, Macedonia, and then going eastward. So now we're leaving the Levant, we're leaving what is today's Lebanon, which claims they have the original recipe. But this is argued back and forth. They brought it to Central Asia, they brought it to Afghanistan. They took it on the southern Silk Route to India. So what's this got to do with leadership? Leadership is shared. Well, now what? Do you know this couple? I don't. But I was given permission to show you something here where I'm going to quote from Mary Kay Radnich. Now this gets a little tense. So the making of good baklava, the dough, that was once what a woman was judged on to see if she was worthy to be married. Holy guacamole, as we say at Mexican Village. But you know, I've also, and Toyosi, I promised I wouldn't sing, but can she bake a cherry pie, Billy boy, can she bake a cherry pie? Charming Billy, she can bake a cherry pie, she's the apple of my eye, and we're going to be married tomorrow. Yeah. Well, go on. Now you don't have to be really good about making your dough because it's frozen. But this baklava, if we move forward, it shows you that leadership is a learned skill. It changes through time. It changes in cultural contexts. But you also have to realize that you have to be very, very careful not to get yourself trapped into gender roles and not being able to go out of it. But you must do so in a cultural context, knowing that what is allowed, what's not allowed. But you can be an iconoclast. Iconoclasm is something important. And you also should remember to always give credit to the people who showed you how to do what you're doing. Well, let's go on, and I'll tell you, the 18th century, the French had a craze about baklava. Frank Baklavasi, it changed the way. And if we think about what that means, is that's a case that even good leadership, it needs to be fine-tuned. Let's go back to Turkey. Let's see where we are in Turkey here. Let me tell you a little about Turkish baklava for a moment. It is so thin. It is so thin that when you hold it up, you can see through it. Well, what does this tell us? Well, the leadership in baklava like this, if we pull that through, it should say to you, leadership has to be accepted, effective, very delicate, but it has to be transparent. Now, I'm not going to spend much time on these next 2 slides about this is a typical baklava recipe. Look at the steps. Keep going. What can we deduce about this? Leadership requires both attention to detail and to process, plus patience with a capital P to get the best results. Now, we're wrapping things up because my stomach is growling too, so we better get rolling. 5 key things. Can you count them down with me? Item number 1, and this is actually in reverse order. How is leadership like baklava? Leadership may or may not leave you with the right taste, but if you don't like it the first time, take another piece. Number 2, not everybody agrees with you about being a leader, and they will dispute it. But if you're going to be successful as a leader, your organization needs to be able to resolve conflict, especially if you're going to have a community. Number 3, leadership comes in layers. And sometimes you've got to be careful so that your bureaucracy doesn't become what drives it, but that you're actually producing something for everybody. You've got to have the right flavor. Number 4, it's sticky. It's sticky. Leadership is sticky, just like baklava. And you need to be willing that if things go to HE double hockey sticks, you need to help clean it up. 5th, and this is the ultimate. If you're the right persons, if you're engaging in the right leadership at the right time, on the right project, you're going to have something that leads to sweet success. So at this juncture in time, place, and space, I want to say thank you. And I don't think we need to have a demonstration of baklava making, because I think we should go early to our midday meal. Thank you again.